Hey everyone, welcome to our very first Dev Radio happy hour. This is pretty exciting for us because we've never tried this before, and we are going to have a good time. I have Matt called as always. Matt, good to see you again. I
Good
have
to be here. This will be a fun one.
yeah, I got Pete Messina and Anthony. This is very unprofessional of me. I forgot to ask how to pronounce your last name.
Nevico.
Anthony Nevico?
Nevico.
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 See, this is how new this is for us, everybody. So here's what we're gonna do. The last couple of weeks, we have been doing a series of GitHub webinars on CI/CD using JavaScript applications, and it's been really fun and stuff. But we're gonna speed run some of the content tonight, and we brought in some experts with us, and we're gonna do is we already knew just from audience comments that there's just so many better ways we could have done things, and we brought in people who are going to just, hey, while I'm running through it, say, hey, why didn't you do it this way? Why didn't you do it that way? A little bit of casual commentary, a little bit heckling, maybe a little bit of bottle throwing, depending on how bad the demos are. So I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to just really go at it. So I have the trinity of developer environments, basically an Edge window open, Visual Studio Code, and Windows Terminal, all just open to completely blank area. And basically, we have this GitHub organization we've been using for the entire webinar. We're going to coin that term, right, Matt? Devinar series. And MSUS dev examples, and we are going to create a new repo for our happy hour. And I am going to create a public repo. And basically what I'm going to do here is going to add a README file and just create this repository. And the very first thing we did in our first webinar is we just really walked through the 101 of creating your very first workflow. And the idea was we went through step by step. And so if you wanted to go back, it's on the playlist on YouTube. But the idea is that we opened it in GitHub code spaces. So we went in, we hit code spaces, and new code space. Obviously, the other option is we can clone it locally, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So let me actually remove these names from the screen so everybody can see the icons at the bottom. Here we go. So we clone it locally, git clone, a repo to our local machine. We have it in Visual Studio Code. And then we just created a file in our .github workflows, and then just any arbitrary name. So we'll just call it build.yaml. And I think we did the minimum YAML file. And so we went through line by line, one line at a time. On push, we did a jobs array. In that jobs array, we did our first line, which was first job. We did a run zone. I think for the first one, we did Windows latest, did a steps array, and we just checked things like one step to run in Node version and one step to run NPM version.
I give you credit because I always have to look that up.
You missed the license, and they have a beer license that says you can do whatever you want with the code, but if you meet the developer in real life, you owe them a beer. And need to spin up a license file.
It's funny because I always wonder when you get these agents how that you brought up the funny license, but I actually wonder about the real license if you're using a hosted agents, how that actually works if you're using an OS that's not Windows or Linux. Like I see the Mac OS latest and stuff like that. That's actually a question that came up in the chat, and it's completely gone over my head. By the way, we got somebody said happy hour in the chat. I'm gonna pop that on the screen. And if you got any other questions other than happy hour, msusdev at Microsoft.com. You got some phenomenal questions like that, let us know. That macOS latest license question completely blew my mind. It's like, yeah, so do you actually need a macOS license to run the macOS latest hosted agent? I was like, Don't know. That's a great question. And that, that, of course, that person's building OS X apps. So they're already in a world of licensing. Okay, so we have, this should be the minimal YAML file. And let's see, minimal YAML file. Commit that and push that to the magical world of GitHub. And of course, the first time you got to click the sign in with your browser button. There we go. And we should be able to go to GitHub Actions. We have our minimal YAML file. There's our first job. And I think one of the things that somebody pointed out to me at, I believe it was at a Ignite conference, is that if you look when it requests your agent and has the labels, right, and it goes to set up job, and it comes by really quick, so it might close up too fast for you to notice. Under the virtual environment tab, you can actually always look, and it takes you to the documentation page with the metadata about the agent.
Yep.
And so that's something I have never seen before that person pointing it out. And because you always ask, well, what's installed on agent? That always comes up in the chat. So for anybody in the chat who's about to ask, that's the number one thing that always comes up. And so when we run this script, hey, check the run node npm version. That's what comes up.
Same in DevOps too. They post what they have in their agents there too, so you can get a good idea. It's usually a pretty big list though.
Yeah, that's a massive list.
Yep.
And so the question is, and then, I throw this out to the group. Do you use what's installed on an agent? Do you want to bring your own SDK tools? Like, how risky is that? Like using the SDKs installed on agent?
I mean, I personally, when I stick to just from like a DevOps perspective or like the GitHub side of it, I usually use what's on the agent unless there's like a reason to use like a different node version. Using like the action nodes and then set your node version to be essentially the latest if you're using some of the newer features.
I'm a big fan of make it simple until it needs to be complicated as opposed to making it complicated from the jump. One interesting thing that I wonder why it's WSL v1 on the build agent. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's that would be interesting to find the answer to one day.
I wonder why.
Sounds like a technology stack thing, just like how long we were on Hyper-V v1 on some other services. All right, so jumping back to Visual Studio Code, right? So we got this, and then the other thing we went over was with the container, right? And you go to Docker Hub, you pull down, and just like you said, we need to go to a specific version of Node. Need to go to Node 17 or need to go to Node 14, and I think downgrade to Node 14. I think that came up with a really specific developer stack somebody was using. Just push that up. And just do the magic workflow of going back and forth between GitHub and Visual Studio Code. Even I'm pretty sure there's an extension that you can see this in Visual Studio Code. If not, somebody's out there developing it now. And it looks like I may have a typo. And then there we go. Container operations are only supported on Linux runners. So that tells me I need to go ahead and swap my label to a Linux runner, whether it's Ubuntu specific version 1804, 2004, or just the brave Ubuntu latest. I'm just trying to make it look like I made that mistake on purpose.
I was sold.
Yeah, I was there. It was a teaching moment.
Yeah, teachable moment. 100% made that mistake on purpose.
So here's a fun one. So would you code your version or would you dare to do latest? I'd probably vote to pin the version so that things don't change without you knowing, but what do you think, Pete?
I've done the same. I've always pinned the version. I've stuck there because at least I know the build's running and what it's essentially executing on the box is going to stay pretty static. I've always kept it like in 1804, 2004, whatever it is from there.
I'm with you. I think, pinning the version guarantees that it runs, and you just have to pay attention that if you've had the same old build pipeline forever, that you're not running old OSs.
Exactly. So think of it like a node, like an npm install, right? You install the actual version, you pin it to that version. I treat it the same way as I do the OS box.
I think you're both right. If you pin the version, if you're using something like Visual Studio Code remote containers, even if you're not using old stuff, you're using new stuff, and it may become old 10 years from now, right? You can still pin the version of the container that the developers are using,
Yeah.
along with pinning a version of the build agent. So everybody's pinned
Right.
to the same thing. So, consistency across the stream, right? All
I
right.
do appreciate the YOLO though. I love that.
All right. So we're on node 14, told our developers you just got to suck it up. Node 14 is what you're going to get.
Yeah, new build agent, old node. Live with it.
Wonderful. All right. So from here, we come up with the most sophisticated node application I could come up with in a live webinar. So I said, hey, and I violate all of the rules. So package JSON. I think it was
You are missing a git ignore file. I won't leave that against you.
No,
don't worry.
no,
I'm going to
no,
disappoint you.
no git ignore, no license.
Oh,
Worst live demo ever.
it's coming. Git ignore, node modules. Hey, I got that much. Because I don't want complexity and I don't want to use npm CI.
Again, I give you credit. I would have just let GitHub do it when it created the repo.
So there we go. That's how we keep these demos simple. We git ignore the package lock JSON file. We have a package JSON file. I'll put my my app.js file. Console.log. Hello stream. That's simple enough. You know what?
Happy hour. You should have made it Balmer curve.
Let's see. What did I miss? Into JSON and put.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
That would do it. All right, there we go. And then this is going to be fun. You're gonna find out really quickly that I am a .NET developer. I believe it's a moment or a new moment.
No, it's it's that.
And then console.log date. Perfect. And then from here, node app.js. All right. Yeah, there we go. Progress. All right. From here, we'll just take our little build.yaml file and make it exciting. We'll add some jazz hands. So we gotta so this is where it differs from Azure Pipelines, right? Because Azure Pipelines, the checkout is inferred. Here we gotta add the checkout. So this is where I go take people for the first time to github.com/actions to introduce them to the GitHub Actions organizations with all the first party actions. And then the first one being checkout. But kind of leaving it vague that, the first time you use checkout is to check out the code in your current repo. But that doesn't mean the only thing you can use is for checking out your own code. You can use it for checking out other people's code and checking out submodules and doing other absolutely wacky things. So it's just kind of one of those things like that's a clue for later, right?
Yeah.
So actions checkout v3. Was it npm install to pull down our packages, and then node app.js. So this is something like just a really simple. It's not really a build. It's just running a node app. Matter of fact, calling it first job, we'll just call it run node app.
So maybe dumb question, but does action, I know you have first party actions and third party actions. Is there like a roadmap for actions that are coming?
That one I actually don't know. Pete, do you have any idea?
I don't know that either. I'm not sure. I know from here, at least you can see some of the versions that are coming up from the action side of it, but I don't know.
Like I know you can go look at the actions, but I didn't know if there's like, hey, these actions are coming, or like what happened between V2 and V3.
Well, yeah, on some of the releases, you can see like if you go to that action side and then repo breakdown from like V2 to V3 and some of them like what they've changed. I wonder if in the marketplace city if they have anything from in there, because you can see like the huge list in the marketplace itself.
Oh, that's a good call.
All right, let's see. We go to actions and see from the marketplace. Let's see. We have the checkout action here in the marketplace. And then open issues, pull requests, what's new.
Yeah, so there you go.
Let's
There's what's new.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to pull a lot of this metadata from the repo.
Yeah, I think it pulls the same README from the repo and it just publishes it here.
Yeah, and the versioning is based off of branch names. Is that correct? I believe that's right.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, see, I can't tell. Is it branch names or is it tags?
Yeah, tags. Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's something I would have never dug into by myself.
I just like that there's actions that publish the docs. It's just turtles all the way down.
All right, so
and you can write your own too. That's the nice thing about it, right? You can write your own, keep them in TypeScript, and you can pull in your own actions. You're not limited to what's in that marketplace.
Oh, good. Yeah, I stalled while I completely screwed this up. Actions checkout at V3. Okay, I typed something out wrong. Oh, I used run. I'm supposed to use uses. And then, for anybody watching, run is when you create a cross-platform script, and uses is when you use an action. And I should have caught that. All right. Fix my typo. But it actually tried to run a script called actions checkout. That's just pure excitement. All right, we'll just kick through.
Yeah, this is very interesting sort of thing I was reading a while ago about GitHub Actions. People have actually used them to create like chess games in their READMEs. They don't just use them for like building code. It's sort of an interesting idea.
Like, how would that work? Like
I don't know. I never looked into it. I was curious like how they did it.
Yeah, that's so far beyond my pay grade. I would definitely have to look into that, look it up. Now looks like everything kicked in. We ran the Node app. There we go. Hello stream, current date. So, at this point, everybody would be done with the first webinar. They felt like they're running their first workflow. And the cool thing about this is that the only thing we did after this, and you don't have to actually see this run, is we walked them through how to add names to make things a little bit neater. And I think the only difference between this and any other subsequence is we started them with name just to make it a little bit more readable. We talked about it. Hey, everybody here is a dev. You know how important variable names are, that kind of justification. But while this is okay, the real meat and potatoes, and I'm gonna just clear this folder out real quick. Just because I really want to show the real demo here, right? Was our sample application. So I'm gonna clear Visual Studio Code out, clear Windows Terminal, and I'm gonna go into GitHub and I'm gonna open up github.com msusdev examples, and we have this really cool Next web app. And I'm gonna pop this over on an overlay. Somebody said keep the latest version. All right, so we do have a brave soul who keeps the latest version of their runners. So we do have somebody who lives on the wild side. All right. So while they're living on the wild side, I'm going to share this hyperlink out for everyone who's interested. This is a Next.js web app that we worked on a while back. And what it does is it's basically just a demo app that we use when we're doing all of our webinars, workshops around GitHub Actions. It's really great because it already has a Docker file, everything's set up. So it's just really good for you to just play around with, build stuff out. It already has, really simple npm run build script, all that type of stuff built in. Just leave that at the bottom of the screen for a little while. Now, I'm going to take this template repo and just use this template. And then I am going to create another repository called Happy Hour Web. Just create a repository for this template. Now, this is where things get a lot of fun. So when I test the webinars out, I do them entirely GitHub code spaces. I don't do anything locally. I have been known to do this on my iPad. So I'll just open it in GitHub code spaces.
How do you manage that on your iPad? Do you like, how's that work?
Like the iPad Pro with the keyboard.
Oh, gotcha.
Fancy.
Yeah, dude, because everything I do is in Visual Studio Code, remote code spaces and containers.
Yeah.
So if I can run it in code spaces, I can run it within a container, and I'm doing everything in .NET 6. Then there's nothing really from a technical perspective hindering me. I'm at the point where I'm wondering if I need Visual Studio Code. I don't have Visual Studio installed on my local machine. I'm a .NET developer 90% of the time. I'm a JavaScript developer, I'd say about 10% of the time, a .NET developer 90% of the time, and I don't have the traditional Microsoft Visual Studio stack installed. I have Visual Studio Code installed, but I wonder how much longer I'm going to have that installed.
Gotcha.
When this first previewed, it melted my face off. I've been in dependency hell trying to figure out like why something won't run or whatever, and the idea that you can literally press a button, get an environment, dispose of the environment.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. I can share this publicly now. I couldn't share this publicly a year ago. We prototyped and we had to throw it away because the technology moved too fast. We prototyped an entire Azure developer course where the entire environment was built by using I believe it was Docker Compose, 12 containers running all the Azure developer spaces services like Azure Write, Cosmos DB, everything like that.
Wow.
Running with .NET whole 9 yards, running in GitHub code spaces, and at the time Visual Studio Code spaces. And all you do is just click on a URL and it opens up a Visual Studio Code window with all your lab instructions on the right hand side, a machine running Docker with your entire lab environment at the bottom in the terminal, and then the code editor on your left hand side. We are through the looking glass here where we could just somebody could start a job tomorrow, and if you need somebody on your dev team to have an environment, you just click a button. And I think this is just it's mind melting.
Yeah, it was always so stressful, like with .NET Framework going from like version to version and trying to get them all installed and recognized in Visual Studio and IIS versions and everything. Yeah, this is fantastic.
So this is a JavaScript webinar, and the answer to that is it's even easier.
Yeah.
Because everything in the JavaScript world is already Dockerized. So .NET had so much friction on that side of the world. So you got to imagine if they had a lot of friction, the JavaScript world has so little friction because everything's already Dockerized. So, with Node just being one of the most pulled down Docker container images ever, with Nginx being one of the most pulled down Docker container images, be able to build a Visual Studio Code remote container for Nginx, for Node, for React, for these next applications, for Angular. This is just the smoothest transition that you can make as a team to not having things installed on your local machine. So it's just something that if you haven't explored yet as a developer, even if you're not exploring GitHub code spaces, at least explore Dev Container and Visual Studio remote containers as a introductory step as a team. I know this is a little sidebar, but if you're not looking into it, look into it. It's the future. All right. So that was my little spiel. We have this little machine. It has Docker on it. This is something I did not know 2 weeks ago. So Docker build tag, next web app. We have a Docker file. So, let's build it. And this is the coolest thing ever. The Docker file will run npm run build and npm run start, which for this next application will just run next build and next export, and then next start on port 80, right? So, this is GitHub code spaces. I don't really strictly have access to port 80. So it's going to do a kind of like little neat redirect handoff into a new tab thing. You'll see it in just a second. So Docker run detach publish. Where I'm just going to pick an arbitrary port 5080 next web app. So GitHub Codespace is going to detect I tried to launch an application. It says, here you go. I'll forward that port somewhere else for you. So I have a private little preview of this application I'm running. You see it has even the 5,000 extension at the end. So just really cool way for me to dev and test stuff. And I mean, that's not just if I'm doing it in Docker. I could just do npm run dev. This runs next in a dev instance, which ran on port 3000, and do that nice little handoff on port 3000 to GitHub preview.dev. It allows me to just test this application out. So I was just showing that this is already Dockerized. We we're able to use Docker to do npm run build, npm run start. So I'm going to try and do two things in this half an hour, right? We're going to try and do a workflow to do the npm run build ourselves, and then we're going to try to do a workflow to build the Docker file, and then I'm going to try and push it to a container registry. So here's our happy hour web. Gonna just pull this locally. So I have an empty Visual Studio Code instance. Git clone. Pop this down to the current folder. There we go. Create a new Docker file. Again, the name is arbitrary, but the folder is essential. And that's a question that came up in the chat before. Can we have multiple names? Actually, another question just came up in the chat. Are there compute size limitations to be aware of when we're working with build agents? For hosted build agents, I don't think we're worried about compute size that much. I'm sure the build agents have compute characteristics that you don't want to run beyond, right? But I mean, they're shared build agents, so you'll eventually run out of memory or CPU if you're doing anything resource intensive.
It's a good question, actually. I know the sort of the info on the build agent itself, what its core is on there. I don't know.
So I believe the build agents for the GitHub runners, 2 cores, and I think it's like 7 or 8 gigs of RAM.
Isn't it like a DS2, Anthony?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know it's a pair of cores, and I know it's like 8 gigs of RAM. I don't know what the drive space is, although I do know you can always bring your own if you need to do something big or exotic or interesting.
That's where I was going to go, is that if you need something
Mhm.
bigger than what the host agent is going to give you, you can always bring your own. And we have a lot of people who are doing builds, in their own offices before going to a hosted build agent. And instead of retiring their hardware, they just use their existing hardware as, bring your own agents.
Yeah, Pete, you're actually exactly right. I just looked it up. It is under the hood. It's a DS2v2.
Yeah.
So 2 V cores, 7 gigs of RAM, 14 gigs SSD.
Yeah. Yeah, but similar like what you said, Anthony, that's right. Like if you're sort of hitting limits there, it's probably better to go to your own sort of agent if you have something sort of on your very specific to run.
All right, it's time to walk on the wild side a little bit. So we are going to go ahead. I'm going to try and just copy this this from somewhere else instead of trying to type it all out and just walk through it. Just because I'm prone to typos. Uh, just honest. So have a little workflow, build Next.js web application, triggered on push. We can definitely add filters and stuff like that later if we want to do, PR filters, stuff like that, or specific branches or tags. Single job. This job's called build project. We can give it a nice little name so we give our UI a little spice. Runs on Ubuntu latest because we're living on wild side. Thank you, chat, for recommending that wild side life. We are checking out our code, install our npm dependencies, and we are running npm run build. Now, this will theoretically build our Next.js project assets, and then our build agent will die, and our assets will die with the build agent. But we just want to make sure everything runs as expected. So we'll just do our initial build.
How would you recommend doing environment variables here?
So we have the env, and we can set it at different levels, right? So we could set it at the we could set it at the step level. We could set it up at a higher level. And that really depends on whether it's shared, right? But whether it's shared between different steps, whether you need it for a specific step. So when we did the webinar, the only time we used an environment variable is when we did the GitHub. When we did the GitHub steps, but we actually didn't talk about environment variables beyond there. Like, what are scenarios that the two of you seen where people were using environment variables?
Yes, typically when it comes to like a JavaScript side of it, so compiled on the Node side of it, when you're pulling in environment variables for the actual application side of it, that's like typically what I see, especially on the Node, like the Node space of it.
So this is different kind of use case, but I worked with somebody who was building effectively a facade for IAC behind the scenes. And so as they built complex environments, this was all in ADO, but they would, each sort of component in Azure ended up a stage in the build. So it was sort of like, spin up the VNet, peer the VNet, and you sort of passed things stage by stage by stage. And they had a set of functions that could go back and forth between the DevOps API to sort of report back out like what was happening. So you say, hey, spin me up an environment. It spits back a 202 to say, hey, I'm working on it. And then you could actually query back and forth to see where it is and what's happening. But it would pass the things that it built stage by stage by stage by stage by stage, which was a pretty cool use case.
So we have a question from the chat, and this one I'm going to punt to our panel. Any idea if GitHub Actions will support a stage concept? I suspect this person is using Azure pipelines for deployment workflows. Do we just leverage environments to different workflows for this?
I don't know. That's a good one too.
That is a good one.
We have a good audience. All right, so I will say this. Sometimes we won't always have a good answer to every question, because sometimes questions are just really good. If you have questions, you feel like we don't always have a full answer, you can always send them msusdev@microsoft.com. Sometimes what we could do is we'll internally escalate the question, see if we can get you a deeper answer, or sometimes we'll just chew on it a little bit longer and come up with a bigger answer. And I don't know if I cut either of you off. Did I cut either of you off?
No.
No, I'm noodling.
Me too. All right, I'll buy you some time. So our build has ran. And looking at it, we checked out our code. We installed our NPM dependencies. We built our project assets. It created our static site. That's one of the cool things about Next.js. You build your static site, and you can still have the interactive components, or you can have it be fully static. It's kind of, and I'm probably doing a very horrendous job of describing how their rendering engine works, but it creates your static site content in the .next folder, which becomes really interesting when we want to create our build artifacts. Because for the purposes of the webinar, what we did was we created a build artifact and a build job and a release job, and just handed off the artifact from the build job to release job. That way, if the release job ever failed, we still had that build artifact or proof that the build job ran, and it is just as a troubleshooting mechanism or lever to use. So then what that ended up looking like is we went into Visual Studio Code, and we went in and we said, hey, name upload static site uses actions upload artifact at v2, I believe, with name static site, and that's what we called the artifact. And then the path was just like I showed you earlier, that next folder. And then we created the release project. Make sure the tabbing is right on this. Name release project. That runs on Ubuntu latest. Again, living on the wild side. Steps up. I already have my YAML tabbing wrong.
And so here you're pulling the build, right? So you're pulling the actual compiled JavaScript code, like the minified version of it, and you're going to push it to the Docker image. Is that where you're going?
That's eventually where I'm going, but for just now, so I haven't gotten there yet. So for release project, I'm going to just pull the static site content and I'm going to create a GitHub release. So this will fail unless I put in a needs build project, right? And then I'm checking my notes real quick, make sure I don't have any typos. I need to put in a uses to download static or download site content, uses actions download artifact v2, and that only needs the name static site. So that's our two jobs, right? Build project. Once we're done with the build, we upload that artifact. Release project just downloads the artifact. And I think just to validate that we didn't do this wrong, we can just run ls recursively. Just kick this up, and I'm sure if I have any typos, GitHub Actions will let me know. Okay. Yeah, so eventually we'll create either another YAML file or a third job just run in parallel with build project for the container side of it. But
So, like,
none of this is containerized yet.
so where's your position on when to split the YAML? Like, how far would you go?
I think that actually goes to the question that we couldn't answer. Like, is that a different stage? Like, is that the concept of staging that Azure Pipelines has? You know, that's that almost becomes a philosophical question. The answer for me is I have been completely indecisive. So I've delivered this webinar 3 times, right? Each time I deliver this webinar, I've been indecisive on whether or not I will do this as a separate YAML file. And this is the same thing when I've actually done this for clients and consulting. I'm indecisive if I do this as a separate job in the same YAML file or a separate YAML file. My litmus test is how long the YAML file is. If the YAML file is 1,000 lines long, then maybe we'll split the YAML file. But then again, I also ran into people who say, "Oh, if your C# or if your JavaScript is C# or Java code file is longer than 10 lines of code, it should be a separate file," and that's a little outrageous too.
It is. I've kept it on purpose, though, Anthony. I mean, we've talked about this before, right? If the purpose is doing one thing, I've kept it there, and if it gets a little bit longer and unreadable, then split it. Like, that's always sort of my litmus test.
Yeah, I like that spirit. It's sort of 2 cuts. I don't have in my head, it's not an absolute line limit. It's really, what is it doing? Is it still doing the same thing? Sort of shortly there, followed by like, do I have to flick the mouse wheel to read the whole thing? If so, maybe you're doing it wrong. But I like that a lot.
One thing we could say is that if we're doing the Docker container, it's technically hosting the site differently than if we have the static site content that we're exporting through GitHub releases. So we could argue that we're doing something different. And that also throws a wrench into the argument. Yeah. So I could see a dev team having a meeting and arguing about this for 3 hours. So that's the joy, right? So we built the project. It created our static site artifact, which if I downloaded it and open it in Windows, it'd be a zip file with all of our static content. The release project downloaded our site content, which is about 154 files. Of course, we can create a GitHub release with 154 download links if we really, like our devs. And then we did ls recursively and proved out that we really do have 154 static files for this website. Lots of images. So we want to zip this up. And this is where I first introduced the marketplace, because I go in github.com/actions. And, I always go in and like, okay, they got to have an action for zipping, right? Zip, compress, archive, anything? Nope, nothing. So then I go in and we'll go to the marketplace and I search for zip. And that's where we find the zip release, which just happens to have 2 years later, it still has the most stars.
So is that how you pick sort of, I'm sure you got this question too. Like, what's your line on which one to pick? Where do you? How do you figure out which one you want to use?
I want to say there was a sophisticated algorithm and a panel of very competent people in the organization who went through and did a whole bunch of legal stuff.
It
No,
looks like this.
Yeah.
who has the most stars and least amount of bugs?
Yeah.
This one. There.
One open issue, 74
Yeah.
stars, sold. Ship it.
Yeah, I mean this is what we're rocking with. So and you know what really sold me? None of the arguments are required. So we go in. Now the name could use some improvement. The Doctor Zero zip release, but that's all right. When you write a good action, you get to have any screen name you want. So we're gonna take that and we're gonna go ahead and put that in our workflow. So I'm gonna just take this one out and call this archive content uses. And then I will, even though they're not required, I will give it a name. I'll call this site.zip. And then we don't I've used it enough. I'm not going to waste anybody's time proving this out. When it really gets interesting is if we go to the official actions and start looking into GitHub releases. So we'll go back to github.com/actions, and this is where things get complex. And we'll do release. That's where you get to create release and upload release asset. The twins of complexity. If at this point, you probably haven't seen action that required so much hand holding. Because to create release, not only do you have to go uses actions create release at v1, but you also need to give it a unique identifier because you can be referencing this release later. And at this point in the webinar or any workflow, you probably never referenced another step before or even known that there was a syntax. We're referencing steps because a lot of workflows, even examples, I've never seen that. And then the whole environment GitHub token thing, that something that's probably they've done a really good job updating documentation, explain that this is built in the secrets GitHub token, and then just setting as environment variable here will allow you to go ahead and access the API. And then all the with stuff here, the only ones that's really required is tag name and release name. The rest of them are optional. Wherever you set the body text of the release, whether it's a draft or pre-release. So just going in there, let's create a GitHub release.
So a question here, like where would you break it? Where would you say that I'm only creating my features on my main branch? Would you create that in a separate YAML file, or how would you filter that off?
See, that's interesting because so if this was a really serious enterprise project, I will use a completely separate YAML branch for creating releases that only fires with specific tags, like a go-to release tag.
Yep.
And that will have a filter and that will have all of the GitHub specific stuff in it, because just looking at the complexity there, right? And then I would also have a lot of SymVer stuff, semantic versioning stuff built in, because semantic versioning is hard. And that's just been my experience. I don't know if both of you've had that experience with semantic versioning, but it's just it's something. But how about the two of you?
Same thing, right? So the main branch would have essentially its own, for lack of a better word, on the DevOps side would have its own pipeline and sort of release to get triggered off of that. You keep it separate. Feature branches would essentially have their running instance, and you'd keep the YAML file for the main and the feature separate.
Would co-sign that, and then I'd sort of set up different acceptance criteria from a gates perspective to get in. So check in needs to get through test coverage, needs to smoke test, needs to whatever. And then if you're actually going to merge in, need to have one or more devs sort of go through it, review the PR, require that someone sign off on it, et cetera, and you can kind of architect it through so that you're not getting in the way of velocity. Like people can still check stuff in, but you can guarantee that someone doesn't accidentally commit to main and blow stuff up.
Yeah. So one other thing I would call out here is they recommend using the reference. I basically, for the demos, I use the run number because it's just so easy. You go into the actions and This is run number 2. So that's release number 2. But it also it chimes up that conversation about versioning. That versioning is something you really need to think about and plan for as an organization. And then if you go into a marketplace, there's a lot of really cool actions that helps you out with planning around versioning. So yeah, this works today, but we could do something so much better around this. And then I actually encourage people when they go to pull up the slides and source code, which I will show the overlay for right now, for these sessions and demos, that we actually automatically build the slides and source code, and we do some nifty things around versioning there too. So you can see examples there. All right, so we create the GitHub release, and then we do the same thing with uploading a release asset, right? So we go in, and that one's not much different. Actions, upload, release asset. We just go ahead and copy that so we don't have any typos here. So name, upload, site content as release, as GitHub release asset. Uses actions, upload, release asset. We need to grab that same environment GitHub token. This is where it drones on a little bit, but it's just super important to point out to everyone that you want to get it all right. The upload URL.
Yeah, and I give you credit that you're typing most of this.
Yeah, you get used to it. So you want a steps dot, and then you want to reference the previous step. So that's the create GitHub release, right? It's like the weirdest version of a code review. Dot outputs dot upload URL.
Interesting.
Then I believe the last one is you just grab the asset path, the asset name, and the asset content type. So for the upload URL, we just steps, reference that step, outputs, upload URL, asset path. I think, what was that? The path to the asset. So /site.zip, because that's what we call the zip file. Asset name is what we want it to be called on GitHub. So that doesn't have to be the same as the asset path. So we could do something really cool, because one of the things I found in releases, if you always call it like site.zip, it'd be kind of confusing if somebody downloaded different releases. So we just do site-v and then use string concatenation to put our run number in here.
Oh, that's very cool.
And then asset content type, that's where we just throw in applications at. All right. Hoping for no typos.
Big money, no whammies, no whammies.
No whammies.
Everybody's waiting and watching.
Right.
With a bated breath. There we go. No whammies. All right, we're building. Well, this part we already know is going to work. But the release part is always makes us nervous. And, it's so funny because while it's building, I always go to the release part when you hit create a new release and just showing people all that stuff we just built out is here, right? The tag where you create a new tag, the title, whether it's a draft or pre-release, indicating that. We attach binaries. That was the part where we uploaded a release asset. This is the body part, just showing people that, that was all that stuff that you was just filling out so that, they can draw a parallel between what they were filling out and what's there on the release page. Here we go. Build project's done. Release project only takes about 10 to 15 seconds. So this is going to run fast. Now I just jinxed myself because I said it only takes 10 to 15 seconds. Here we go.
The demo gods are fickle gods.
Very fickle. Oh, don't worry. I'm hearted against the demo gods because I was brave enough to deliver the session, Introduction to the New Azure Portal, at Microsoft Ignite.
Wow.
And the internet connection died at the conference center. So I had to introduce the new Azure portal at a breakout session with no internet connection.
So how do you I want to hear that. So did you fire up Paint and you were like, it's gonna be a square and it's gonna be blue and black?
The photo viewer.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I'm never gonna. Why would I take pictures of the portal? And they're like, no, you have to take pictures. And you're like, okay, fine, I'll take pictures because you're saying I have to take pictures. And the person from the AV team is like, see, I told you to take pictures.
There you go. That's a good story.
And
I'd have
we
been
slide through the pictures.
I'd been sweating on a whiteboard, like trying to draw it out. And
I promise you, it really looked like this, and it really did look like that. All right, so we created our archive. We created a GitHub release, number 3, with the release name, release 3. It wasn't a draft or pre-release. We uploaded our site.zip file as site-v3.zip. So if we go to the repo, there's our new release, release 3, and that's our site v3.zip. That's pretty much, us releasing the static site content to GitHub releases. And so then the parallel build, right, is us pushing that Docker container image to a container registry. And so just for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna just throw in another job, right? And I'll just say build container.
see, here's where I'd try to break it, right? And so now you've
Go
got
ahead.
your release, and then I'd move it off to another process to build the container.
So a new YAML file.
Yep.
Let's do it. Oh, actually, hold on. Let me put it in the same folder. Containers, YAML. All right. Build and push Docker containers. Right. Wonderful. Name, build container, run zone, Ubuntu 20.04. Let's pin it because this will be a good job. And then steps, name, checkout, code, uses, actions, checkout, V3. Another weird one that came up in the comments. Somebody thinks it's really weird that I put name first, but I got that from the GitHub Actions documentation. They do that too. But in Azure pipelines, they never do that. They always do the actual step first and then a display name down lower. Is that like a weird GitHub Actions thing, or is that just me?
No, I'd always put it first, just so that way as you're reading it through, you know what you're reading.
Yeah, same here. I like that structure because, I mean, it's nice when things are self-describing, but especially if you're going to use some interesting marketplace actions, you may not. The doctor has been kind when he talked about labeling the zip, but maybe the doctor will create something with a funny name going forward. Or if you put that chess action in,
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So from the Docker Hub side of things, if you go to github.com/docker, their Docker org has lots of stuff on there, right? But if you type in action, you get all their really cool actions, and they have lots of them. And their login action is pretty universal. It's not just a login action to a specific container registry, even though obviously they have their preferences, but it's pretty universal to all the different types of registries you can log into. So for the webinar, I used it to log into Docker Hub. So I just popped up, hub.docker.com. I was logged in already. So I just went to account settings, with the security, and I'll just delete this as soon as we're done. Just generate an access token. And that was pretty much, I want to say that was the extent of my involvement in this, right? Went to GitHub secrets for this repository. Just create a repository secret. So Docker Hub access token. You can tell how often I do this. I'll just create a Docker Hub username secret, and then I'll just put in the username. The funny thing is, if you go to the login action, they tell you specifically, please use a personal access token, because you can actually put in your password, and that will work just fine, which is bananas. Like, I would think they would just block that and tell you absolutely never use your password here, but they allow it. Another cool thing here is that you can just, as you, whether you do it through the portal, through the API, you can keep updating and replacing your access token, but you can't access it once you put it in as a repository secret. All right. So we have that login action, uses Docker login action v1 with username and password. So it should just be able to name login to Docker Hub, uses Docker login action with username, secrets, Docker Hub username, I believe is what I used. Password is secrets, Docker Hub access token. So if I don't have any typos, that should just work. And this will be one of those situations. Oh, I do have a typo. Secrets. Unfortunately, that is not a valid value. No such thing as secrets. Kick that up. And I'm just gonna filter this because we really only caring about the Docker containers right now. This will be a good argument for filters and only building on changes to certain files and stuff like that. All right, so that was exceptionally fast. All right, log into Docker Hub, login succeeded. I mean, yeah, there we go. Obviously, it's not going to show us the username password, but we logged in successfully. So we should just be able to just go back and to that list of actions for Docker. And the cool thing is the login action is specific to the type of container registry you want to use, right? So I just did Docker Hub, but if you're using, ACR or like one of the other container registries, you just change which registry you're pointing to. So, you create your instance and you get your registry name AzureCR.io and just you're swapping out one property. And that's the only change you're really making here. Obviously, you're definitely going to want to use repository secrets for stuff like this. You're not going to want to put any of this plain text in your YAML files. All right. So the cool thing about the Docker actions is that the login is specific to your container registry, but the build push action is universal. So we are going to grab the build push action, which is down here. And there's a couple of different ways you can do it, but the simplest way is one of the examples down here, which basically says set the context to the current folder. So that means we have to check out our code, push to true, and then just make your tag latest, and you got a container image that's built and push to your container registry of your choice. So I trust in them. We will do that
with tag latest.
Yeah, I don't like tag latest. You can alias latest, but you should always have a version number.
Yeah.
Well, let's do that. Let's do it. Build and push to Docker Hub, right? Uses context dot push true. And for tags, we can say, so the organization is MSFT, USDev. I'll call this next web app like we did in the example. And then for the tag, I won't use latest. Let's use that GitHub run number. Obviously, we're using some other variable or environment variable or setting if we're using some type of versioning. I'm playing with fire right now because I'm going off script.
I'd blame us.
Yeah.
We're like the Muppets up top, the two old men.
It's funny. You say that this Sunday will be the first time I ever get to go to Kennedy Center in my life.
Nice.
And because when we brought the tickets was in the height of the pandemic, we brought the actual seats that you saw the people up top in the Muppets sit in. So we wouldn't have to sit near other people. So my wife and I got fancy outfits so we could sit there and fuss about everybody else at the concert. And so that's what we just said. We're trying to look up their names because we don't know what their names are either. But the two guys who fussed during the Muppets, during every performance. I don't know if anybody knows what their names are.
I think it was Waldorf and Statler.
There it is.
Yes.
Yeah, like
Yes,
my
you're
wife
right.
and I was just talking about that. We were like, yeah, they're always up there fussing. We're gonna be dressed up fancy just like them at the concert.
Yeah.
You need to name your try catch blocks Waldorf and Standler.
That would be amazing. All right, let's check GitHub. Let's see what we got. I really like that our commit names are getting better. Or is it getting later? I'm not sure.
They're
All
getting
right,
better.
go to push to Docker Hub. That looks like a successful, well, a more successful build. We're pushing layers. For anybody looking at that file size, image optimization is not part of this webinar series. Please see another webinar series. We talk in depth about that.
Tune in for another series.
Yeah, Alpine was not featured. All right, so if I go to repositories, hit refresh, there's our next web app that we just pushed up a few seconds ago. Tag number 3, notice no latest tag. If we go to build push action, I think that tag setting, see, all the examples they have only has a single tag. One of the things I never figured out how to do during the webinar was how to push multiple tags. That's just one of the things I will like to do. Like they have an advanced page. I love to have a situation where I can, you see how they have tags and a list. I love to have a situation when I just have a list of multiple tags. Do y'all mind if I try it real quick?
Please do.
Go for it.
Yeah. Because in my situation, I love for every push to have latest and then a specific tag, right? So this is ideal to me. So every push will be latest plus the run number. I don't know if this will work or not. Trying latest.
50% of the time, it works 100% of the time.
Are we syncing it up? All right, checking our code, logging in Docker Hub, build and push. Let's see what type of metadata we're getting here. All right. Well, it's doing the build, so nothing useful yet. Next web app latest, next web app 4. So yeah, that worked. It's going to push to both tags. So once it's done, we're going to have an image that has under the tags list. It's going to have 3, 4, and latest. With 4 and latest being aliases of latest being an alias of 4. I have that right. Latest is an alias of 4, right? Or is it the other way around?
Latest should be an alias of 4 if we did it right.
Yeah. If we did it right, that's a strong if. This is definitely a speed run. All right, so refreshing. There's 4. There's latest. There's 3. All looks good.
Beautiful.
And yeah, I mean this is where, you know, at the end of the webinar where we got to, we just opened up an Azure portal window. I'm going to spare everybody the web app demo because everybody's seen that 100 times. But I just got really excited because I was one of the 5 people left on the universe who haven't tried container apps yet. So I just spun up a container app instance, spun up new resource group. Containers are fun. Called it single web front end. Create an environment. Web cube cluster. Went to app settings, got rid of the quick start image. When I was doing the webinar, I was talking about this name just being a friendly name when you're going through the portal to identify this. So web FE for web front end was what I used. We could use ACR here, Docker Hub. You choose public private image. If we're using private image, definitely, you know, if it's Docker Hub, what was it? Docker.io is what we're using for the registry login server. And for the username password, same concept. Don't use your real username password. Please use the access token here. And then for the image tag, MSFT, USDev, next web app, pin it to a version, so version 4. For ingress, we enable HTTP ingress, accepting traffic from anywhere at port 80, review create, and the create button. It's funny because I'm looking at the time. We are almost exactly at hour and 10 minutes. This is amazing that we are landing right between, we said between an hour and 15 minutes. This is crazy.
So
Um,
are you ever gonna go through some of the like the ACR side of this too? Do like the build tasks or anything from there?
So so it's funny because we did some videos a while ago where we did ACR, and we actually did all the builds on ACR build tasks, but we actually didn't do it as part of this webinar series.
Mhm.
So like, for somebody who's done GitHub Actions, who's done JavaScript, who's never touched ACR, and they were in an elevator with you going up 5 floors, like why would I care? Like, and that's not a negative way. I'm super curious. Like, what's the elevator pitch for ACR build test? Because I've done it from a developer perspective. I was impressed by it. But like what's the value of doing it?
I mean, from my perspective, I mean, throwing it in ACR, it's sort of like a self-contained environment for you to be able to like build and sort of move around Docker images, right? And so you can do if you have a dev test prod Docker image, you can do a pull from the test image from the dev ACR to your test ACR when it's actually ready to go. And you've sort of contained that task in and of itself within your container registry. It holds the process.
I double down and say, like, I love that you can VNet integrate it and keep it private Azure to Azure. I love some of the enterprise features. Yeah, you can do that in Docker as well, but love geo replication, love some of the stuff with Defender around being able to sort of do best practices scanning, and make sure that you don't have anything malicious. I love the code signing stuff if you're doing real production. So if you want to go if you want to get hardcore, you can configure ACR to not take an image that's not signed. And then you can double down with Gatekeeper and say, hey, on my AKS cluster, I also don't want to run something that's not signed. And so it just gives you a lot of ways to substantively harden your solution. And the other piece is the lower tiers are cheap. And so there's not any real kind of barrier for entry to play with it.
Yeah. Some of the other container registries where you get into enterprise solutions can get really
spendy.
And ACR has a really low barrier to entry. Even if you're like a small organization, small company, if you're a startup, you can get started on ACR pretty fast and pretty easy. The other thing about ACR build, that's super interesting to me is that if you don't have the hardware to do Docker, and people don't like to talk about that, but I have a i7 64 gig behemoth right next to me. But when I'm on the road, I can't feasibly run Docker container builds on my laptop. I mean, I could technically run some container builds, but it gets bottlenecked pretty quickly. And so be able to run that off my machine. That obviously from a security perspective, right? That's there's an interesting aspect to it, but from an actual compute perspective, ACR build test kind of saves me a lot. But doesn't that get right back to that whole GitHub code spaces conversation that the more stuff we can offload, the more stuff. But yeah.
I also the other use case I've seen happen a lot. You can set up build tasks to deal with upstream stuff. So I know a lot of folks, you're coming from your cores.net or something, .net revs, and you don't want to have to rerun your whole build pipeline. No problem. Tell the build task to keep an eye on it. It'll rev. It will cut something with a pre-release label.
Mm-hmm.
You can smoke test it, and again, you set it up once. You have to do anything. It's just sort of, hey, great, revved, successful, done.
Yep.
Absolutely. So we have our container instance running in Azure Container Apps. We have achieved the end of our journey. It's been a fun one. Thank you both for coming on. I have learned a lot. Matt, I'm sure you've learned a lot too.
Yeah, and we even got stumped by the audience a couple times. So that was we've got more learning to do. I'll do my homework once we get that mail into msusdev.
I do have one thing for the audience I want to share. Somebody recommended a new idea for Visual Studio Code extension, Spellcheck. There's actually a Spellcheck extension already out there for Visual
There
Studio
is.
Code, and I use it all the time and fuss at it daily. So you should go install it. It's phenomenal, and it will frustrate you. Lots of good questions from the audience. If you're watching this after the fact and you come up with questions, please, throw them in the YouTube comments. We definitely keep an eye on those. If you come up with questions and you want to send us an email, msusdev@microsoft.com, please do. All the demos I just ran through, they're open source on GitHub, github.com, msusdev, and NCICD. That's where we keep the show notes from the entire webinar. And even though we did a little freestyling, a lot of those demos I just showed you came from that GitHub repo. And I'll make sure that same repository hyperlink is in the description box for this video. But other than that, I want to close it out by giving everybody a chance with any final thoughts, just going down the line. Anthony, do you have any final thoughts?
I just encourage people to go play. I mean, we did this live in an hour. Lots of moving parts, lots of stuff happening, but you have the code, you have the ability to go play with it. Go put your hands on it. It's not that scary. And as we sort of showed in real time, you typo something, it tells you, you do it again.
Pete, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd echo the same thing. Come up with an idea and start to work with it. There's nothing better than trying it out with a real idea to see how you can get it from start to finish.
And Matt, do you have any?
Nothing as good as those two. I mean, that's it, right? Just go ahead and get your hands on it, get dirty, and see if you can break it.
All right, everybody. That means you got to go get your hands on, go to GitHub, spin up a repo, and create your first YAML file and let us know how it goes. Again, we shared a lot of different ways you can connect to us. So we'll see you next time on Dev Radio.
Thanks for bringing it.